right, talking about Aristotle's Politics. And for this one, I want to take a slightly different approach than what I have normally been doing. Because Aristotle is kind of challenging to summarize, like each idea builds off of the last thing. It's very he's very selective about word choice, so individual word choice matters a lot. And that makes it difficult to just pick quotes out and to talk about, because you have a great quote, but it's loaded with all of this context that you need to have from before that quote. So then you end up just reading everything, and that's not my favorite way to go about this. So instead, what I'm going to do is take a stab at trying to convey kind of Aristotle's structure, the overall structure of these things, so that I might be able to just kind of highlight structures or elements of his thinking and then be able to isolate that piece in quotes to reference back to. So, for example, or I guess to get into it, would be, in my understanding, nature is a fundamental aspect of Aristotle's thinking, in the sense that anything that we do has a nature to it, an element of nature to it, and that in complex situations, that in the complex situation that is society or a city or a country, the best way to function is in accordance with nature. That is the most sustainable way to live. And again, for anybody who might be unfamiliar with the idea of nature, it's not necessarily like the physical world out, like it's not the trees and everything outside, right? It is these inherent qualities throughout life. Ideas like it is the nature of a dog to chase cars, right? Which is such a weird one. I've never actually seen that. I don't think, but you get what I'm saying. Like, or it's in my nature to be creative, or to think like this, right? So it's nature in those terms. And critical to this is Aristotle has ideas about material, form, and then sort of action, consequence, and finality, in a sense. So material and form is a little bit easier to explain. Like the material, it's easy to think about cotton. I don't even know if this is cotton. Cotton being the material, the form being a sweater, right? Or you could look at like arms and legs. Limbs are the material of the form of a body. You can kind of abstract it like that. So all to say is that he's very cognizant of examining things as a whole, but also the parts that make up the whole. And that necessarily the parts of the whole must function in the same manner as the whole, right? Like your arm functions differently than your leg. So it's not that they're doing the same processes, but that its nature helps bring out the best version of the whole. And so in Politics, he talks about the nature of cities or societies being, and the parts of it, right? The parts making up the whole. So it's the households are a part and they make up the city, right? Households together make up the city, and multiple cities make up a nation, right? And so each level serves a different function, but they should all be aligned. They should be in alignment with the way that they operate. That's at least the best way for the most sustainable version that most people will be happy with. And so in that sense, the household, right, So then you can kind of work your way. You could go from base up or back down, depending on how you need to figure this out. So one way that it's framed in the book is you need to get your household, and it's sort of in alignment with like the way that humanity would have progressed. At first, there would have been households, and then groups of households creating a community, and then sort of the official like city. So we built up from there. And so you need to have, he describes it as sort of self-sufficiency at each level before you can move on to the next one. So you wouldn't have been able to develop a community or a city if households were in disarray. If they couldn't even function independently, they can't really properly function in the whole. So he's advocating for, as a decision maker, as a politician, as a legislator, looking to the household first and building up from there. But necessarily also considering at each level the dynamics are different, the responsibility or whatever is different. They serve different functions at different levels. But then that gets into the ideas, and this is where I'm branching off into sort of an interesting thought of my own right now, because we're obviously at a different moment in kind of the chronological timeline of humanity. And I have reservations about some of the ideas of nature according to Aristotle based on our current experience. And so I'm asking questions like, what is our aspiration right now? How is that different than in Aristotle's time? What is our ultimate objective? Where are we aligning in terms of the direction that we're heading? And the reason why I ask this is because we have capitalism sort of dominating our shared objective. Is that the best approach to life? Is that sustainable? And I don't think it is. So what are the alternatives, right? Like, where are we going? Are we just happy with kind of perpetually consuming, right? And having cultures of different generations that just consume different things? That seems odd. Are we explorers? Are we going to try to become a multi-planetary species? But again, how can we even think about becoming interplanetary when we haven't gotten our household in order on Earth? And so that kind of can get you thinking, like, we're in a globalized moment. We're no longer nation only centric. Like, we're way too integrated at a global scale to not think of things in a global way. So how does that factor in? I think it's a bad idea to have a global single source of authority. That's just way too dangerous. But so then I think about the capitalist mindset, right? The for-profit. I've established this in a lot of different ways, but capitalism necessarily creates competition, and having competition be the forefront of the mindset, the shared mindset, is, I think, a problem. I don't think it's the ideal natural version of cooperation. And so how do you shift away from a competitive mindset in a way that doesn't lose some sort of human experience? Because what competition provides is this exciting human dynamic of, like, the ability to change circumstances or some level of control over your outcome. I don't know, it's just not sustainable. Then you're forced to ask, is that even realistic? Can you count on other countries sharing in that mindset? Or if you take the foot off the gas, are they gonna exploit that? Okay, I'm just gonna fire off some other things. It's not clicking for me quite right now, but authority assessments. I think that we need to build in checks on authority in some sort of frequently revisited way, some sort of systematic way. But the challenge here is it can't be so systematic and procedural that it just becomes another bureaucratic thing to exploit. So, how do you create an environment with a sincere ability to check authority with the burden of proof for supporting that authority falling on those, you know, exercising the authority? How do you do that on a regular basis? I still don't have an answer for that right now, but that's something that I'm contemplating. I'm thinking about shared goals, as I sort of alluded to before. Our goal, a capitalist mindset, is about acquiring money and consuming. So shifting away from blind consumption and maybe replacing that with how can we increase freedom, right? We love to shout from the rooftops about how great freedom is. But if you really sit down and look at it, if you sit down and consider all of the different aspects of your life where your actions are dictated by someone else's demands or thinking or whatever, you realize that there's not actually very many moments of freedom in life. So starting to look at things in terms of how can we continually increase freedoms. Another thought, strong military, but only in defense. So to be clear, and this would be more of the kind of Greek warrior mindset, like at that point you have soldiers who are there genuinely because that's in their nature, is to be sort of a protector, a defender, rather than a way to achieve freedom, rather than a way to better your lot in life or whatever it might be. And definitely a shift away from kind of imperialist motives, a war economy, and generally the military industrial complex. So sincerely only in defense, but they would be well trained, and it would be very clear. Our position would be like, we're not going to do anything unless there is a legitimate pressing threat or we've been attacked. I think, as shitty as it might sound, one of the most noble things that you could do would be to decide, like, the argument in war for the best defense being offense cannot be the default. So instead being like, we are not going to be active unless we're in direct defense of our country. And if that's the case, if somebody attacks us, right, just know, and we'll communicate this to the world, our position is we're gonna pull out of all of these settings, but if we are attacked, there's gonna be a shitstorm coming your way, punk. It'll be bad, so don't do that. So okay, this was the point on competition, like being tough, being kind of cutthroat, right? That's virtuous in competition, but I'm curious if there's a way that we could realign our priorities or realign what competition means in our lives. Instead of pitting man against man, like, I don't know, how do you create that healthy competition? Like the type of competition that's like, it's not me or you. It's kind of what athletics is our competition is going to push me to achieve tremendous new heights in a virtuous direction, at a virtuous aim. Physical ability, mental ability, not destructive abilities, not in money-making strategies. Which, speaking of money, one of my thoughts is we need better control over our economic policy. One of those things, money not being able to produce, having money produce out of money, that shouldn't really be a thing. Hiccup there being, how do you deal with investing then? And I think investing should be strictly a boring contractual obligation at a set rate over a certain amount of time that's easily, right? And a condition of this being individual security or liberty, right, cannot be a condition of debt. That debt cannot be allowed to enslave people. And so trying to return to this idea that the risk is on the lender, not on the person receiving, right? They obviously should have some sort of accountability or consequence, and you can build in contingencies for this too. You shouldn't lend if that's going to affect your individual security or whatever as well. And then the last thing I've mentioned is a return to the household city state-nation dynamic. This was an interesting one too. It had me considering the modern household, right? And I'm running into a challenge because, again, Aristotle is very focused on the nature, the form of things, and how the parts come together to fit into the whole. And in modern household dynamics, we've totally eroded that idea. Now, I don't know, I think instead of gendered roles or whatever it might be, you could probably just conceptualize more broadly what the household needs to what the goal of it is, what self-sufficiency at the household looks like today, because it's different than it was in Aristotle's time. So, right, instead of looking at it as a kingdom with the king ruling over the queen and the kids are kind of like subjects, like it's more of like a partnership, and it's a strengths and weakness thing, right? So your household comes together, you have to achieve these ends. And I guess part of the reason why I struggle with defining this for today is because I also like what is the function, what's the objective of the household? Aristotle was contemplating, right, and he addresses the flaw that households were running into was, originally the objective was sustenance and survival and procreation, and over time, with the introduction of commerce, currency created this new issue where people were misassociating, or they believed that because currency was the thing that afforded their ability to obtain sustenance and survival, that was now the objective. Their perspective changed. They misassociated the two. And so if I'm trying to think of our modern version of, and I want to shift away from this capitalist mindset, the money first mindset, then what is the objective? And there's also some play of like technology. How does technology come into play with this? Oh, that was the other thing in terms of like long-term goals, right? And what we're seeing in the progress of technology and what it does for us to maintain the current attitudes towards capitalism and modern life in a sufficiently technologically advanced society. I'm seeing two outcomes, and they're not great, because this pursuit, like if it seems like technology is our new like objective, let's advance that. And let me say, I think in theory the ideal version of this would be technology would take care of our sustenance for us so that we can shift to everybody focusing on something else. And I've talked about things, or I've explored thoughts on a post-labor economy and what that would look like. Things like social currency and stuff like that. But because of our mindset today, it seems like we're pushing toward a singularity in technology, which would accomplish that like ability to produce everything, anything. But then everyone would be enslaved to the owner of that technology based on our current system. And additionally, that post-labor economy in this current mindset would necessarily require that a very unnatural way of living. It would be just using technology to generate currency, and it would become extremely superficial, flat, and lacking in any type of virtue or source of nature. I don't know. I lost it.